am a survivor of domestic violence, 15 years. I left when my children were really little and I thought that they hadn't been affected, and unfortunately they had. My children were zip-tied to chairs and forced to watch Grand Theft Auto.
Tech was one of the influences. Yes, they have observed violence growing up, but the amplified by use of tech. And how is that seen in action?
We are desensitizing, right? And it's across the board, adults, children, we're so desensitized that we're passing it down. Are you consuming technology or is technology consuming you? All of this is evolving at machine speed and then we're reacting at human speed. I'm exceptionally alarmed by what will happen when this generation of boys become men.
How might we build a culture of respect?
We need to learn boundaries. Every single person alive needs to learn boundaries in their lives.
Some great conversations on your group activities and the table and online. This is very leading up to another difficult conversation on prevention, education, and technology shaping the culture of respect. And as Carmen talked about, respect has come out multiple times across the day with us. Can I start with Danielle? You today on this one. I think there's a full-on 2-part episodes of conversation with Danielle with the whole story. Please go to YouTube and find that one, and you can understand the ups and downs of the life, what Danielle has lived and gone through. You have seen so many facets of violence, partner, and you have your 2 kids and then the elder boy. Can you give a bit of context on the whole story in terms of the education and tech play with the young boy specifically, and get a bit of a context that how it is impacting you now as well? It's been so long.
Okay, so so I am a survivor of domestic violence, 15 years. I left when my children were really little and I thought that they hadn't been affected, and unfortunately they had. And it only came out after I saw a few things, but really a lot of it came out after I was in the women's refuge. So my children were zip-tied to chairs and forced to watch Grand Theft Auto. Now, to people that don't know what Grand Theft Auto is, it is a Xbox PlayStation game that is all about finding a prostitute, sleeping with the prostitute, killing the prostitute, and getting paid. Okay? And I am very firm on things that children should not be part of. That is just one thing that my children unfortunately had happened to them. They were locked in cages. They were starved. They had the door handle taken off the doors so that they couldn't get out.
In terms of how did the violence got impacted? But because tech was one of the influences. Yes, they have observed violence growing up, but the amplified by use of tech, and how is that seen in action? Because there were occasions, the elder one was in abusing you as well. And what's the translation? What's the closest connection? What do you see are the, what do you call it, trends you can see? And again, we were talking about early intervention earlier. What were the key points where you thought that you could strongly intervene in that space, considering you were, a survivor? You were going through your own journey of recovery.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I was part of a board for a council, and one of the police persons said, I don't think people are realizing what they're watching. And it really spoke huge volumes to me. So I'm going to give you an example. The Mario movie, Mario Brothers. A lot of people think it's just Mario. It's a good time. People laugh, But actually, if we really look at what Mario Brothers is bringing to the table for our kids to think it's normal, let's look at it. So you have Mario Brothers, they're the rescuers. Then you have the princess or the queen. She is then told she is now been captured because the turtle or whatever he is has decided that that's what he wants. And if she doesn't go with him, all the family will be burnt alive. And then to top it off, the movie then has a song that is very addictive to the kids. I know so many kids that started singing it as soon as they watched it about stalking the princess, which is just terrible. So I think a huge part of it is we need to be looking, even just as adults, like, what am I okay watching to agree to? Because that is how we have suddenly just missed the mark in what is what is being shown to our eyes and what we are accepting, because time and time again you start to accept more and more.
Mhm. Thank you. Can I go to Sarah? From a point of view of, you've been doing a lot of work in this space of tech and young people being exposed to tech in many ways and form. And then as we were planning for this panel, we were talked about the intersectionalities of risk across, when you are in a family of abuse happening, it just amplifies further down the line. So what kind of insights and trends you're observing with your cohort you are interacting with?
That's a big question. I think a really good point that Danielle brought up was that we are desensitizing, right? And it's across the board, adults, children, we're so desensitized that we're passing it down, like, or they're adapting to that. Because to have that normalized and to look at it from a different lens, like, how did that pass the executive, how did that make it through? How have we gotten so normalized? Which, I mean, those that are old enough like I am to have grown up with the game and to have played it, and that was very like that from the very beginning, have we not evolved, so we're sort of uh this behavior is becoming more normalized. And that's a problem, because when we're willing to accept it and no one's speaking out against it, and then when you do now, it's almost like, ooh, quit being so uptight, just, relax a little. So you almost get, we're flipping it on people that are actually calling this really poor design out. And they're the ones that are the problem. And you're like, well, no, we need to have some shared understanding that if we continue down that path of desensitization, where does that lead us? And what are we willing to accept, and what are we willing to it's more than just accept, but it's tolerate, and you're building it into your culture. So this, we are degrading our social cohesion by allowing that, and not that is an attention currency. We have this attention deficit crisis in Australia and globally. It's not just here, but it's here. And what are we going to do about it? Because if they're not aware of what they're consuming, I talk often about, are you consuming technology, or is technology consuming you?
Hmm. Hmm. And we also talked about that the idea of going upstream to prevent, because the current solutions which are available, it's not upstream. So could you elaborate on the idea of upstream prevention work, which is more impactful?
Yes. So we see, and I'm sure many in this space are in the downstream. After harm has occurred, you're doing these programs to deliver the outcomes for the people that have already been impacted by harm. So I talk a lot about upstream. So those programs are very essential. We need to keep funding them, so you don't cut the funding there. But let's figure out, where can we put more funding as well upstream? How do we go back further? How do you listen to that intersectional voice? How do we make sure that those communities that are designing, for community by community earlier, so that they can help us to create the structures and systems that we need to actually do the meaningful upstream work? That downstream is currently not working. We are already aware of this. This is not a shock to anyone in this room. But in order for us to have real change as a community, as a country, is we need to move upstream from that harm. So before harm occurs, what are the things that we could recalibrate to make this thing work better? How do we work better? How do we work as a community better? And I think that intersectionality is really important, that making sure that the right people are in the room making the decisions that need to be made. and that we have those voices at the table. Because right now we go to a lot of meetings, it's very black and white. Many people there haven't had the lived experience to be able to provide the insight. We're reading things out of textbooks, and it's not necessarily the reality of the communities of which are going to be living with the policy of which you're developing. So it's making sure you get the right people in the room. And if you're those people that are in that room, figure out who else is missing and get them in the room.
Mhm. Thank you, Sarah. Can I go to Karen, please? Picking up from where Sarah left on the the connection between going upstream and intersectionality, but when you add the layer of tech and workplace and how the sexual harassment and then violence is impacted, and you have done some work in that front, do you mind sharing a bit more? Uh, what are the initial impacts you have, and then what are the outcomes you are trying to achieve with that program?
Yeah, thanks, Dev. Um, and thank you for having me on Wajak Country. I'm so grateful to be here. So, Full Stop Australia works in domestic, family, and sexual violence. We run helpline services 24 hours a day across Australia, and then specifically our sexual violence helpline in New South Wales. So, for the last 52 years, we've been listening to the stories of primarily, but not only, women who've been subject to sexual assault and domestic and family violence. And over, we hear about the harms that that caused. And as a result, I think the founders of our organisation set us up and said, you need to do three things. You need to respond, you need to advocate for change to laws and systems, and you need to change community attitudes. And so we work primarily in the response space, but actually we do a lot of our own generated work around education and prevention, because when you've heard that many stories of the deep harm that's caused by domestic, family and sexual violence, you know that you actually have to do something to prevent it. So a lot of our work in the prevention space is really targeted at adults. And I just want to say it's really important that we focus on children and young people. But we all know that particularly technology-enabled harm is being perpetrated with enthusiasm by adults. So we talk about young people, and the social media delay is an important response to that. There's a whole range of other things. But let's remember that adults are using these platforms for harm. And the gendered nature of harm, which my colleagues have already referenced, so that women are targeted online in very particular ways. And most importantly, First Nations people and culturally and linguistically diverse people are targeted in very particular ways as well. So that when you put together virulent online racism, which is real and causing extreme harm in communities and in workplaces, and then you add that gendered lens, and women, young women in particular, women generally, and LGBTQIA plus communities are getting like layers of severe online harm. So some of the things we're working on, we work in the prevention space with workplaces to work with them around how to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. And you might say, what's that got to do with, the online environment? Well, much of that these days, a lot of the online sexual harassment in the workplace is occurring. So we're working on cultural change, on attitudinal change in order to prevent the harm occurring in the first place, but also to equip workplaces with the skills to respond effectively when it occurs, and to invite people to share. I'll just finish on this, but the Australian National Research Organisation for Women's Safety did a study on the use of online sexual harassment, and they interviewed people who'd used the online environment to perpetrate sexual harassment. Sidebar, if you ask people that have used harm, they'll tell you about what they've done. So it's good to ask. The people that used harm in the workplace, like sexually used online technologies to sexually harass colleagues, essentially, they knew what they were doing.
Mhm.
They did it with a purpose, and they were perfectly happy to talk about it. So we know that these, as in our modern workplaces, a lot of our communication, a lot of our support relies on, using online technologies, many of which have freed us from, you know, ridiculous requirements to be in particular rooms at particular times, but they are being weaponized, and they're being particularly weaponized against women, First Nations women, and culturally diverse women in rates that are deeply disturbing and with intent. So we work to try and, encourage workplaces to put in place the sort of training and support that addresses the positive duty to end sexual harassment that's embedded in the Human Rights Act. In the federal human rights legislation, because we know that that's causing harm. But I think my colleagues have said we've got to go right back to the beginning as well and make sure that that gendered violence, and I would add, explicit racist violence, are also being regulated and addressed by those people who have designed systems. So we've got harm by design at the moment. I think Danielle's given a beautiful example of harm by design. What we need to do is make sure that we're holding all of the companies that create these sort of environments to a safety by design requirement, and make sure that we regulate them and reward good work in safety, and that we actually penalise harm by design.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Thanks a lot. Can I go to Sarah? Considering we've been talking about violence in different settings now, and then using the use of tech in different settings. You were running a program working with younger men from the year 5 to year 12. And what are your observations in terms of the work and then use of tech and then prevention work in regional and remote communities and in the communities you are dealing with?
Yeah, absolutely. So we delivered 2 programs, I Respect and Girls Speak. They're the exact same thing, but one's delivered with young men, for young men, and one is with young women one is delivered by female facilitators for young women. We've been doing that now for almost 6 years, and we've noticed a massive, massive shift in the past 2 years when it comes to deepfakes and pornography, and this is becoming more and more prevalent in remote communities that we're working in. So up on the top end, there's 2 communities that we're working in particular, where we have some of the highest rates of sexual violence in the Southern Hemisphere. And I think sometimes when I say we, I mean the government, forgets that we have communities uh, in isolated areas where they're being targeted. They're being targeted and they're exposed to such a high level of violence, sexual violence online, that young people are then sharing to others, and other young people. We're working with young men that are in year 5, for example, who are exposed to a level of sexual violence that perhaps we were afraid to admit. We have male facilitators that are youth workers and counsellors saying to us, we can't keep up. We can't keep up. It's just changing at such a rapid pace that the program that we have, it needs to be changed so often, because we need to be able to include content that we can't even keep up with as facilitators, let alone how are our young people keeping up with that? Not keeping up with it, sorry, but being exposed to that, and who are they chatting to about that? The level of violence that has been the biggest, I guess, noticeable change for us, and that's why we're working so closely to have the program evaluated to see if what it is that we're doing is creating change, or if there's changes in knowledge and in intent and in attitudes, because it's just changing so rapidly that it's really tricky to keep up.
Thank you, Sarah.
Do you mind if
Please do. Yeah.
So I run a charity called Foundations of Hope. We look after women and children survivors of domestic violence. So we look after the recovery and healing when the other services have, closed that area of expertise. And there's 2 things that keep coming up very regularly from our clientele. The first one is the perpetrators using Google reviews to come for our clients. So multiple of our clients will have businesses. So they'll jump on Google review and just start spamming it. And a lot of our women have had to close their businesses, psychologists and etc. The other thing I do want to mention is the other one is when the woman was in domestic violence, she was told to pose and do sexy things. And then those photos have then been said, if you don't come back right now, I'm going to send that to your parents. So a lot of the time they do go back. A lot of the time they'll do what they need to do because they know that they don't want their parents to see them in that state.
Oh, God. Can you just please, because you have been also observing the use of AI to amplify how quick one could recreate and create at mass. So you can be lazy still and then still be perpetrator. That's stuck at that word all the time. I haven't heard that word that long. But how does AI has amplified that exponential push towards creation of revenge porn and things like those? And how are young people also using those?
I think I talk a lot about that exact thing that, all of this is evolving at machine speed, and it's evolving really quickly with velocity and scale. And then we're reacting at human speed. So everything is really encumbered by bureaucracy and red tape, and we haven't caught up yet. And it's miles ahead of us. So there's so much harm that's occurring. Some of it's foreseeable harm. So we could see that it's going to be happening. I talk often about, the iPad generation growing up. They've been exposed to such graphic online content already. We already have a crisis of violence against women in Australia. I'm exceptionally alarmed by what will happen when this generation of boys become men. And what will that mean for women? Because they're already starting to harm girls. And the technology facilitated gender-based violence is multifaceted. I think that boys are the first and frontline, the first victims of that are boys. They're being weaponized. They're being weaponized by this graphic online content thrust upon them too early. You add on this misogynistic manosphere layer that's, particularly going after them intentionally, trying to recruit them. And then, if you look at girls are then exposed to their own level of harm online based on, algorithmic suggestions and prompting there. But then on top of that, you have boys, also them being weaponized against girls. So girls are also copying it really hard right now. So we need to do something differently because without anything moving upstream, we are still in this very reactionary downstream. People are not paying attention well enough to what's going on and the scale of what's occurring, even with, platforms like Grok being able to generate some of those deepfake imagery or the explicit, unacceptable amount of child sexual abuse material being able to be created and generated at scale. I want everyone to be leaders in this space and, stop using platforms that are allowing this to happen. Your attention is currency. And I know that it's convenient to use these platforms because, you may already have a following on them, but what are we doing? Why are we allowing this as a culture and a society to be using platforms that would allow that to happen? Because to me, there's nothing really worse than to be able to generate. We never imagined the days of the Snapchat filters when you could have dog ears and, to be where we are right now. No one thought about this. So, but we should have. This should have been safety by design is not a flippant term. That is an exact term. There's good actors and bad actors, and there are people that do things by accident. You didn't really think about your technology being used in that way. And then there's people who plan for it to be used in that way. They know exactly what they're doing. So we need to have reactions that are keeping up to the pace and scale that this problem is exploding.
And can you conclude that thought on the idea of algorithmic duty of care? I think that's a fairly precise way of explaining what the intention from all AI models or large language models or any form of tech giants?
Yeah, so algorithmic duty of care is making sure that the suggested things that you're seeing, there's a duty of care in what you're seeing. So that when you're looking at children, like the social media delay um, can help with certain aspects of things, but not everything. So if we're looking at what content are they still able to see, even if they're logged out but still accessing technology, what can they see? What content are they looking at? So this is a multifaceted community approach we need to have to resolve this. This is not just one pillar alone, right? So I talk often about, educators are going to need to educate and regulators are going to regulate and tech designers need to, design tech better and parents need to parent better. Like this isn't just one pillar alone. We need to be approaching this as an entire community response to it because as we know from other things we've talked about today, it's that community. It's not just one pillar. You can't just put the funding in one area and expect it to work. Everyone here needs to be doing the right thing. Everyone here, not the right thing, but everyone here needs to be working and getting funded for the right programs to respond to this because this is a national emergency, to be very honest with you. And if this is not on your safety plan already, you need to make sure it's on your safety plan because technology is coming for your anything that you're already doing in this space will become compounded and it could be weaponized. If you anything that you're doing, which I know that you are, everyone here is doing your delivering programs and you have data, right? So if you're managing data, that data can be used in a coercive way. Somebody will try to get access to that data. How are you protecting that data? What are we doing when we're trying to design systems that will, benefit community? Those systems are very important. And how do we make sure that when they're designed intentionally and with the right actors in mind?
Thank you, sir. Carol, this question is from Slido. It says, how can not-for-profit make digital safety more accessible for parents and carers who may have low digital literacy themselves?
Yeah, I think that is a really interesting question. I just wanted to call on Sarah's comment around we have young people in communities with some of the highest, so some of the communities where there is least amount of services have the highest uptake of mobile phone and digital use among children and young people. So we are working in environments where young people are not necessarily as digitally excluded as we thought they would be because we've been able to put reasonably low-cost mobile phones in their hands. So we've got communities which have limited resources, high digital literacy and engagement by children and young people. So it's really important that we're in our workplaces really thinking about that and not assuming that children don't have access because they do. So it's a great question. I think some of the things we need to think about in terms of working with parents with lower digital literacy is we need to be making sure that they're aware of the scope of the challenge that they're facing. And in particular, having those difficult conversations about the sheer volume of sexualized content, which is going out to boys, girls, children of all genders, and actually enabling parents to have like conversations about what children have seen online, because I do think we don't know the third of it. I want to say the half of it, but we don't know really what our children have seen. So we need to start with some parenting skills and you don't need to know how to use the device to have the conversation about what might be going on in children's lives. And I guess that's where, a lot of our conversations are about how do we manage the hardware, put our parental controls, like all of those things are good things. But essentially much of what we need to do in the digital environment echoes what we need to do in the daily environment, which is relational. We need to be talking to our kids about what they've seen. We need to be engaging with them around what sorts of things they're doing for fun online, how that's showing up for them. So it is about like building parents' curiosity to understand what's going on in their children's lives and addressing their fear of technology. I don't know about you. I have young adult kids and the power issues in that relationship in relation to technology, the eye rolls, because there might be something I can't do, and that clearly marks me out as being hopelessly a dinosaur. It's all fair, let's be honest. But I think just because your children know more about how the systems work and the device works, that doesn't mean you can't have a conversation with them about how they're feeling about what they're seeing. Like, what sorts of images have made them feel frightened. So I think empowering parents that this isn't specialist parenting skill, it's actually relationship-based connections with their children. And I think that addresses that power imbalance where parents are scared, like me with my kind of thingamy that I don't know how to work. That feels like a technical fail as a parent, but actually it's the relationship conversation about why it matters for me to be able to use that, or why it matters for children to have some boundaries around their usage of social or other online platforms. So I think empowering parents to see themselves in relationship with their children rather than having to be experts on digital platforms.
And how is that challenge amplified in multilingual families?
I think that challenge is so amplified because what's happening is that parents are being excluded from the conversation, because the language around it then becomes, something that, particularly if someone's also learning English at the same time that that their children are learning digital, if you like, the parents can be hugely isolated. So I think it's about working as services. We need to be kind of helping parents understand that regardless of, the digital environment, they are still their children's primary influence. Actually, all of the research tells us that. And so helping parents see themselves as people who can have influence, and making sure that in the work we do with parents that we don't make disrespectful assumptions about cultural attitudes to parenting, that we're actually engaging with parents in a really open way. But I think it is that isolation that parents experience, that culturally diverse parents might experience from this whole conversation, is something that we need to be really keeping an eye on when we're looking at school-based education and as services. When we're doing that education piece, we need to make sure we're not isolating parents from their children, and that we're inviting parents, we're calling them in rather than calling them out for the things they may not know.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that because I absolutely love what you just said. I have 4 children, and they're all at different ages. And I've changed things the way I used to, just let them go to their, laptop device or their Switch device or something. I'll actually just go in at random times and I'll just sit with them. And I'll be like, show me your game. Show me what you're doing. Show me what's happening. What are they talking about? And it's just a great way of knowing what's really going on. And I'm not saying you knock on the door, you just go on in and just sit down and just make yourself known there. And from my experience, my children love it. They absolutely love it because I'm coming into their lives. I'm coming into their world. I want to know about their game. I want to know about their passions. So it can work in such a great way, but it's also extremely important for the safety of your children. So if that's something you can implement, I'd really encourage you to do so.
Can I just ask a quick rhetoric question? Does everyone know the average age of a gamer here in Australia? The average age of an online gamer? 10, 4, anyone else? Just 1 or 2? Pardon? Yeah, it's 33. So that's the average age of a gamer. So when we're delivering our programs, we're chatting with young people around, you think that you're playing Call of Duty or Fortnite or whoever, or Roblox or whatever with whoever, another young person. But the average age of a gamer in Australia is not a child. They're an adult. they're well aware of what they're doing in these chat rooms. And so the eSafety Commission and AFP have worked really closely to come up with a parent and guardian workshop called Think You Know. I'm not sure if everyone knows about it, but you can look that up and you can put on a workshop or deliver a call, like have a family that you're working with where you could connect them to the Think You Know workshop, which is really, really targeted at working, supporting families and parents and caregivers and knowing what is the latest data and the latest way of, and the best way of working with supporting your children to access and use technology safely. So I highly encourage you to look up Think You Know workshops. It's free, completely free. And in the NT, we have the facilitators that come out and deliver that face to face. I don't know about other jurisdictions. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I think it's really worth noticing that we tend to have this binary conversation that children and young people are the problem, the worry. But actually, adults are using these platforms, adults are enabling and continuing this abusive online environment. And so we're sometimes asking people who have not shown the self-regulation to conduct themselves online impeccably to then, as if suddenly they can advise their children. So I think making sure that we keep adults in the picture, it's just too easy to see young people as the problem. These games, these platforms are designed by adults with a profit motive in mind, and they are targeted at children because they see children as that there's a profit in targeting children. But adults need to be in the frame in prevention because adults are the people who are using your Facebook account to malign, racially abuse and put misogynist comments on your abuse. That's not all 12-year-olds. That's mostly adults using those platforms. So let's make sure we keep adults in the frame as well for prevention.
I think you don't need me anymore.
Sorry. You feeling left out?
Yeah, that's fine. I can record. Sarah. This one is from Slido. How can organization, before I go to that question, I wanted to add to that. Please have a look at Professor Scientia professor from University of New South Wales, Richard Holden. He's talking about attention economics. So it's talk about the science of money on attention. So he's been writing fortnightly in AFR, and plug up an interview with him as well. It's a lovely man, very intelligent man. But have a look at that. But Sarah, the question from Slido is, how can organization educate children about online safety without creating fear, shame, or over surveillance?
You say over surveillance. I think that's something that everyone needs to be aware of in general, is that it's a culture we're cultivating about that. That's a very nuanced term. Obviously a complicated answer because it depends on which group you're working with. But I want to echo the comments earlier about it's really important. The relational safety is really important. That's, the foundation. And there's literally playbooks and scripts for grooming now. Like this has been a long-term thing anyway, but this is for real now. Like this is exploding. These communities that are creating and cultivating the, exploitive child sexual abuse material, they are also circulating how do you get a child off Roblox into a private chat, and so they have literal playbooks for this. So I would go back and say that the biggest indicator is understanding vulnerability, understanding your own child's vulnerability, and then understanding that relational safety and community is one of the best ways to protect your child. So having that really strong relationship with your child means that your child will then feel comfortable and safe enough to go to you and talk to you about things they've been exposed to. You have to be willing to have conversations for them to naturally share with you when things like this happen. So if you're not asking about it, then maybe they wouldn't necessarily know that they should go to you. So you have to be the parent and create the pathway and have those honest, natural flowing conversations. As an organization supporting young people, it's also understanding the vulnerabilities that they are coming to the table with and understanding what that looks like in their community. So I would also echo the non-judgmental framework that when you're working with families in particular vulnerabilities, um, we don't often understand when we haven't experienced things ourselves. So don't assume, period. Stop assuming things. Allow those, families and those communities to be able to voice their issues or their concerns, and all of those compounding vulnerabilities for children. I call them when they stack. When you have these stacked vulnerabilities, can create this whole little igloo of isolation and risk, right? And so when that happens, that child may not go to somebody when they need to, and that makes them further at risk. And people are looking for children who are at that level. They know they know what they look like. They know by interacting with them what they're looking for. And so I think to mitigate that is helping. What can we do in our own communities is look for children and provide opportunities for children to feel like they have community, because community and being the safe adults and being those safe people that they could go to if something happened, is one layer. Like if you don't have that in your own family, you may not. So let's not assume that a child would have that in their own family. So if they don't have that in their family, do they have it at their school? Do they have it in their community? What programs do they have access to that they have an adult that they could go to if something happened? And being able to have conversations more broadly about safety and broadly about things that they would feel safe enough to speak out when they needed to. Because oftentimes there are people those children could have spoken to, and they didn't. And we have to address the why. So whether that's in their own family, in their own home, or in their own school, or in their own community, why didn't that child speak out? And I'm not blaming the child. Absolutely not. I'm blaming the adults, which is what I go back to, is making sure that adults are in the loop. These are adult issues. It's adults that are grooming children. It's adults that are creating this content. It's adults that are creating these apps that are trying to steal our attention. Like that attention currency is a real thing. It's being monetized. Remember the days when the website used to end? Now it just keeps going forever. So that's by design. They know what they know what they're doing. They've paid very well for that. So it's understanding ourselves as well as how much are we willing to allow it to consume us. Setting your own boundaries down. And if you want your kids to be off their devices more, be off your device more. You have to mirror it for them.
Yeah, I want to also mention that it's your responsibility to educate yourself as an adult. So we've all heard about Roblox. We've all heard about, police warning parents saying it's extremely dangerous. Please don't let your child on it. So I would say you need to educate yourself. And then personally, I have sat down my children and explained why they're not going on Roblox, and explained the safety concerns and how it's actually been designed to groom children. It's not by mistake. It's quite literally been created to groom children.
I don't do this. I don't ask the same question to everybody, but I'll have an open-ended question, and I want everybody to add from left to right on and build on the answer. And the question is, how might we build a culture of respect? Sarah? So we are building on the answer.
Sarah, nah. How might we build a culture of respect? Starting right at the very beginning with as many people involved as possible.
Mm-hmm.
That's such a big question. How do we build a culture? That's my answer.
Yeah. Please add on to Sarah's.
Thanks, Sarah. Consciously addressing the gendered drivers of violence and the I don't quite know how to use this, and the racialized drivers of violence as priorities, because that's the level of harm occurring as a result of those two particular drivers is so extreme that I think we need to focus on those and really put our energy and effort to working with communities to address those two sets of drivers of violence.
Sarah B.
I would say we really need to cultivate um, children having so much self-esteem and self-confidence and self-belonging in their community that they are untouchable. And what are the programs we need to do that? Whether that's working with their families to be able to have the parents have the skill set to be able to do that. But at the moment, our kids are so vulnerable for so many different reasons that it's making them even more vulnerable. So we need to be urgently addressing that, urgently providing a way for them to be able to grow up with that self-confidence that is actual real, that sense of self and that sense of respect for your own body and your own autonomy and for somebody else. That lack of respect, whether that's implied or absent in your upbringing, is what's perpetuating this ongoing. That we're allowing misogyny to enter the room because it's embedded into everything at the moment. And it's just casually, we're just casually exposed to stealing the princess and accepting that it's okay that she has to do that or her whole family will be burned. Like, how did we get to that point where it was so casually embedded in our culture?
Daniel.
I love what the ladies have said. I would just like to iterate that education, I believe, is truly key. I think that it's great to have maths and science and English in our primary schools and our high schools. However, we need some life skills also in there as well. So we need to learn boundaries. Every single person alive needs to learn boundaries in their lives. And I think we need to learn who the person is as well. Like, so many people grow up and don't know even who they are. They don't know their personality. They don't know what they like and what they dislike. They've just been taught what they like and dislike through their family line. And I think if we're able to just embed it, these two things, just two, I think we would see massive change in the way people show respect to one another.
Thank you. I think on that note, we should conclude the panel. Thanks a lot, panelists.